Hi, I'm Coach Steve, and welcome to my channel. So, for today's video, I'm going to be discussing the book The Philadelphia State Hospital at Byberry, A History of Misery and Medicine by J.P. Webster. This book was released in 2013 and was released by the History Press. This book is not a book about self-help, but is related to the mental health field, and particularly Philadelphia State Hospital, also known as Byberry Hospital, which was one of the largest psychiatric institutes in Pennsylvania and specifically in Philadelphia for some time until deinstitutionalization in the late 80s. This book is basically a documentary and goes over the history of Philadelphia State Hospital from its original founding and building in the early 20th century up until it eventually went abandoned and was demolished. The author of this book, Mr. Webster, is actually a good friend of mine from here in Philadelphia, who I had met and was able to benefit from the wisdom of regarding this property. He had been very well researched in documenting this book. The front cover here is actually a photograph from Mr. Webster, as well as the cottages on the back are a photograph from him. To talk more about the author, it says in the back, John Webster is an avid Philadelphian historian, amateur photographer, and urban explorer. His photos have been published in the Northeast Times, the City Paper, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Germantown Crier. This book does a wonderful job in documenting the history of Byberry Hospital and everything that had went on there. At one point in time in the 1960s, this hospital had had over 6,000 patients on its premises, many of whom, over 400, may have been court-ordered there for various crimes and offenses that resulted in the courts administering them into psychiatric care at Byberry. This hospital, unfortunately, like many, which led eventually to deinstitutionalization in the 80s, does have a very tragic and bad history. There were many abuses that were documented. There were many patient escapes, including some of the people court-ordered there. There was evidence of abuse of the patients there and overpopulations of patients and understaffing of nurses and skilled physicians. This book, not only because it was written by a friend of mine, I thought was important to talk about a little bit because of its history to Philadelphia, where I am from, and the important long arc of history that is increasing quality of healthcare for people in the U.S. A book like this really does its due diligence in documenting some of the oversights that historically have gone on in places such as Philadelphia State Hospital. This property had over 1,000 acres of land and had easily over 12 separate buildings, including some maximum security buildings. It had men's and women's wards. At one point, there was even a tuberculosis ward. This property even had its own morgue on site with over 12 morgue trays. I would really recommend this book, The Philadelphia State Hospital at Byberry by J.P. Webster, to anybody who is interested to learn more about the history of institutionalization and psychiatric care throughout the 20th century up until deinstitutionalization in the late 80s, or who is a fan of Philadelphia history as well. This book also holds a place in my heart, as I had mentioned, because Mr. Webster is a fellow I had met who was a wonderful and influential fellow, and he is somebody who has actually photographed a band of mine in the past at this location at Byberry. He had taken photographs for me and a friend of mine, and did a wonderful job with the band photography at this location. He is definitely a very skilled photographer, and it was really great to have met him and to have gotten the chance to have his photography work done for my band in this location. I myself, strangely enough, and several other friends of mine have even met romantic partners while hanging out in exploring this building. So, for as much as you wouldn't think abandoned mental hospitals have anything to do with dating and relationships, I can confirm you would be wrong. You could definitely meet interesting people to date at a place like an abandoned hospital. But yeah, this property had went abandoned and stayed abandoned in Philadelphia for some time, for probably almost a decade. It had sat vacant after it was cleared out of staff and patients, and the kids did unfortunately take it over, leaving it a little worse for wear, as you would expect. But many people did go there with the intention of leave nothing but footsteps behind, and it was a really good experience when you could run into the more considerate explorers who were looking to learn about Philadelphia State Hospital. This, in 2006, was officially proclaimed to begin demolition, and this book had been written in 2013. So there was a good bit of time for all of the research of this now closed chapter of Philadelphia history to have been done. If you guys have any suggestions or recommendations for books I should check out, I would love to hear them down in the comments. If you have any experience urban exploring at Philadelphia State Hospital, Byberry, or any of the other decommissioned locations, I would also love to hear your stories about that experience. And I'm wishing you guys all of the best of joy and success. Until next week, happy 4th of July.